Hello everybody, welcome to Kids Coding Cube, where I will teach you how to make games from scratch. We're going to be using CopperCube game engine to make these games. Let's get started. So to download CopperCube, I'll leave a link in the description. Just open up Google, go into your browser choice, whatever, and then you want to type in CopperCube. Just write in your browser like this, okay? I typed it wrong, huh? And then you could scroll down, and as you can see, there's CopperCube free, easy to use 3D game engine. You want to click on that, and like I said, I'll leave a link in the description. And as you can see, we have our CopperCube page here. Now, unfortunately, this game engine does only run on Windows, so Mac is no longer supported. So you can just go ahead and click download for Windows, go ahead and save it to wherever you want, and wait for it to finish downloading. Now, once CopperCube is done downloading, you could either go up here, if you're in Microsoft Edge, you could click up here, and it should be in Show and Folder or whatever. But for now, I'm just gonna click it right here. I'm using Chrome, so you could just click CopperCube right down here, and it will open up the installer. And it will bring a pop-up saying, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? It is safe, it is verified, so you could just click yes. And then, as you can see, the pop-up comes up to install it. So you just want to click I agree, next, install, and then you want to wait for it to finish installing. Now, once CopperCube is done installing, you may or may not see this. Please install the DirectX runtime. You could just, by default, this should be checked up. If you have this pop-up, you could just click OK. And then you could wait for it to open up. Now, when you first log into CopperCube, you'll see new 3D app. Please select the app to open or create. So you could either, today we're gonna create a new 3D app. We'll get into opening an example app later. That's basically just an example game. But for now, we're just gonna create a brand new one. So once we click OK, you could full screen it. I'm just gonna be going over the tools today. Nothing really much. So up here is your little tab section where you have pretty much where you're going to be spending some of your time. This is where, so if you go to the Create tab, you could create cubes like this one. So when you click on it, it just, please center the size for the cube, and it would create a cube for you, just like that. You know, smaller you make, if you type in, for example, 5 for the cube, you click OK, it would make a smaller cube. We have spheres, cylinders, cones, and planes. Basically, you know, all of the default tools you would have in a 3D game engine. You have cameras. Now, when you click on that, you basically see this pop-up saying, do you want to create a sample camera, first-person shooter camera, third-person panorama, model viewer, and freak fly? So simple camera is like just a camera. You can't really move. You can't really go up. You can't go down. First-person shooter is like Minecraft. It's basically a first-person camera, like in a first-person game. A third-person camera is, as it says, third-person camera, third-person game. And then we have free-flying camera, which is basically we could fly around the scene, kind of like a viewport. We have model viewer camera, which basically will orbit a model. And then we have panorama, which you can't really move around, but it basically has a wide view. Well, what I forgot to do before I start going into this is this is our scene graph explorer. This is where, if we create everything, if I say cube will pop up over here. So this is basically just our explorer where we could edit, modify different things in our scene or view them. And then we go down to the properties. Now this is where we can control the color of the ambient light, background color, gravity fog, you know, all of the attributes. And then we have materials, which is how you could change the material or the texture of an object. And then we have behavior, which is how you would actually code the object. and I'll make a whole video on this later, and you're going to be spending most of your time in properties. Down here is the prefabs. This is basically just a bunch of default meshes, just a bunch of default things you could drag out onto your scene. And then these are the textures that you could choose from. And you could see this add button, you could click that. And then if you, for example, downloaded a file, and you want it to be a texture, so for example, if I create a cube here, like I was just showing you before, and then let's say I want it to be the backdrop here, I could open that, double click it, and there you go, here's the backdrop for the kids coding live scene that you saw just a couple seconds ago. So, yeah. This is our viewport. This is where you're going to be spending a lot of your time. So basically just properties and your viewport. That's basically where you're going to spend like pretty much all of your time. Everything else is just little extras. You know, you're going to be going there, here and there. But you're going to be spending a lot of your time in behaviors and then inside of your scene. Over here is your menu for moving objects, selecting them, rotating them. So if I wanted to create a cube, and let's say this cube is not big enough, I'll delete this camera to get that out of the way. This cube is not big enough. We could scale it. Let's make it a little bigger, a little taller. You know, now we have a big cube like that. Now, and then we could apply texture to it like that. And then let's just say I want to rotate it in another direction. We could rotate X, Y, Z. And the hotkeys for this, if you hover over each one of the tools in CopperCube, it will give you the hotkeys. So it says right under the select, right under my cursor basically, it says select objects, comma, move camera, Q, and that's the hotkey. You click Q, it takes you there. You click W, it goes to move, E is rotate, R is scale. We have perspective view, so I'll go back to move. We have the perspective view, which is how you move around the viewport. To move around the viewport, you basically, left mouse button is to just look around the viewport. Middle mouse button is to actually move around. You could use the scroll wheel to move in or move out of the, zoom in or zoom out of your viewport, or you could use the right mouse button to also do the same thing as the scroll wheel. I personally like to use the middle mouse button to move around and the scroll wheel. That's what I use the most. To use our perspective, so that's our perspective view, how we could move around. This is the top view where we could see our whole scene from top. We have front, and then we have left. Okay, and this is not all. You could go to view, you could go to view, change viewport type to, and then you could, there's tons of options for you to play around with over here. Yeah, so I'm going to go back to our perspective view just for our little example here. So after camera, we have terrain. Now we could create that. There's a pop-up here saying tile size, side length, do you want to create trees? Do you want to create grass? Maximal height, so this is basically meters, I think. And then we have topology. Now this is what type of terrain you're going to be creating. Do you want to create a desert? Do you want to create flat? And do you want to create hills? So I'm just going to leave everything at default. Click OK, and as you can see, it creates some nice terrain for us. Now let's say, oh, I don't really like these hills. The hills don't look good. And I don't really like this 3D grass here. That kind of looks bad. So I could delete that using the delete key on our keyboard, or you could just right click and then just click delete. And then you could click terrain again. And let's just say I want flat, and I didn't want to create grass. I could uncheck that, click OK, and there we go. Now we just have a couple of trees and our floor, I guess, our floor texture. Now, yes, now I'm pretty sure you could change our floor texture. Yeah, you could change our floor texture just by doing that, by going down here and changing the floor texture like this. And I'll get more on that later. So I could just... So yeah, this is the texture for the floor here. Now I just wanted to create that whole entire terrain. We could create a room here. I don't really recommend. I don't recommend using this to create a room in your game. I recommend just putting a couple cubes together to create a room. But I mean, if you want to, it's kind of glitchy because as you can see, we're inside of our room. But when I zoom out, you could see right into the room. Okay, if I go over here, you can see the roof of the room, but you could see right in through the side. And this is going to be the same way inside of your game. You're going to be able to walk right inside of the room, and you wouldn't even notice it sometimes. And then you're going to be trapped inside this room, and you wouldn't be able to get out. So it's kind of glitchy. I wouldn't recommend it. We have a mesh, and basically what a mesh is it's like one of these prefabs here. This is a mesh. And basically you could import your own mesh as like an STL file, .obg file, whatever. And then we have an animated mesh, which is how you would animate a mesh. Like if I want, for example, if I create a cube here, and I want this cube to be wood, let's say, and then in a couple of seconds I want to change it to this, and then, you know, that's an animated mesh. If it does this, and it's in your game running without you changing it. So that's an animated mesh. You're gonna have to create that yourself. And there's a point light, which is basically a light. See this circle around it? This whole circle will be lit up inside of your game. So yeah. Then we have directional light. Directional light is basically the sun, and obviously you could only have one sun inside of your game. In this case, our directional light is, well, I can't find it on the scene, so I would go to our scene graph explorer, click on it, and oh, it's right here. So yeah, this is our directional light. This is basically the sun. If I delete the sun, all of our textures and objects and our whole scene basically would be dark. So if I create a terrain again, it should be dark. I don't know why it's not yet, because directional light is still here. I didn't really delete it. If I want to delete it, you can see how dark it gets, then how light. So you usually, it's I recommend just to keep it unless you want your scene to be very, very dark. We have a tree, which creates a tree. We'll get into this later. You could mess around with this if you want, but we'll get more on that later. Yeah, and it just kind of creates a tree. Then we have water surface. If I click on it, it tile count, width, and length. So that all it does is create water. And if I go over to properties, attributes, you could change a bunch of stuff like the wave color, the alpha, when underwater color, stuff like that. I could also create a billboard, and basically what a billboard is, it's something that's always looking at you. So if I go to billboard, you can see that this texture here that's on the billboard is always looking at me. It's kind of creepy. It's like just floating around. It's always looking at me. It's so weird. And you can change the texture by changing it to whatever you want by double-clicking one of the textures down here. Going to materials, selecting the text you want one time. Let's say I want this one, select it one time, and then click this button. And as you can see, we change the texture to that, but it's going to be creepy because it's always going to be looking at you. And then we have there is a vertical billboard, which is like a tree. It could be a skyscraper. And that's basically because if I create a regular billboard here, it's just like a vertical billboard. If I try assigning this tree here, it's super tiny, right? So all a vertical billboard is, and you can see you have to mess around with all of these settings just to get your tree perfect. So what a vertical billboard does is it already does all of these settings to make the tree look nice in your scene if you want to use it like that. And then we have a particle system, which is basically a bunch of particles. So right now, to control everything about our particle system, there's all of these settings, which can look which could look overwhelming at first, but I'll get into this in another episode. This is just the beginner episode, and I kind of want to go over the basics first. So as you can see, there's a bunch of particles, and each one of these little smoke clouds that you see generating are a particle. And right now it's set to clouds, but you could really set it to whatever you want. If I wanted to set it to this metal, you could do that, and that looks weird. So that's basically what a particle system is. I'll get into that later on how to make particle systems look like fire. Or I just recommend using our fire, taking the fire directly from prefabs, because it already gives you our fire right here. Then we have Skybox, which is basically like our sky. And I don't recommend, I'll get into this in another episode, because doing the Skybox is really, really hard. Because you're going to have to build your own Skybox, and it's just a really complicated process. But CopperCube does have a couple of skyboxes here. We have our default skybox and our sunset skybox. And then we have blue skybox. So if I go here, I could change our skybox to blue and close this down a little bit by dragging it like that. And you could take a look. here's the skybox that we just chose right now. Let's say I want our sunset skybox here, which is usually what I change the skybox to in horror games. You can see the skybox changes like this. Then we have 3D sound, which is basically just a sound. It's like a speaker, basically, like an invisible speaker. Where you could set the sound. So if I create one, this speaker is going to be invisible. But see the circle? This is basically a estimated radius on where your player will hear this sound. And then we could also change the sound by going to sound file name. We could looping, we could play mode, we could make it loop, we could make it stop, play as 2D, we could do that. 3D radius, now that's how you could change the radius, how big the circle is. So let's say I wanted to change it to 200, not 100. As you can see, this white circle gets so much bigger. That means if our character was even over here, he would still be able to see it. I mean, hear the sound if our speaker was over here. Then we have 2D item, which is like an inventory slot, or maybe a hunger bar, health bar, score bar. It could be pretty much anything. But I usually just like to use it as a... Oops, I mouse scale you when I go to move. I usually like to put it down here and use it as like a little inventory slot. That's how I usually use it. But you could really get creative and mess around with all these settings here. Then we have 2D input. Now this is basically like an input. This like controls for the game basically. And since you can publish this as an SDK, meaning you can publish this to the Android store, it would already come with automatically a built-in joystick, and you could really change this to whatever you want inside of our attributes here. If I click on it, you could mess around with all of this. Then we have a path, and this is basically how you would animate something to go back and forth, around, and I'll create a whole video explaining paths, because paths can be kind of confusing and complicated, so I'll get into that later. But that's basically CopperCube for you. If I go to Polygon Editing, this is basically how you would create custom shapes. So let's say I don't need a cube, I don't need a sphere, no cylinder. I need a object that's not here. I need a shape that's not here. I could go to Polygon Editing and I could edit the polygon here. I could edit the shape here. Here's light mapping, and this is basically our light and shadows and all, how you would edit the light in the scene. If I go to scenes here, this is basically all of your levels. So it says new 3D scene 1. This is basically like level 1. If I create a new one by clicking add, it would ask you for a name. I'm just gonna leave it as the default name and click OK. As you can see, everything is erased, but don't worry, because it's just another level that you have to build from scratch again. You could go here to new 3D scene 2, and then you could click new 3D scene 1, and here's our scene. Then I could go to settings, edit the name, scene metrics. I could view all everything, and then there's scene post effects, which I use a lot, and that's basically how you could bloom. And there's nothing really to bloom because, well, there's no objects on the scene. And then we have black and white, which would make our character see in black and white. Hold on. If I create a terrain, it should work. So I could bloom, I could black and white, invert, colorize, and you could basically play around with it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You could also test your game. So we created this here. Let's go ahead and just create ourselves a little camera guy. We're gonna do first person shooter. We're gonna go ahead and put him here. This yellow box is basically how tall our guy is. His feet are down here. His head is up here. And make sure his feet are not jammed into the floor, or else he could clip out of reality, and that wouldn't be fun. So let's just make sure his feet are not underneath the ground like this. So we'll just put him right up here. I usually like to levitate him so I could see him. And you notice this little cube here. This is where our character is going to be looking when we first load into the game. Now, yeah, so this is how you would test it. But before we test it, this is probably... Before you even create your camera, before you even test, I want you to always do this. go to the very top of your Explorer, click New 3D Scene 1, click on that, click Behavior, click the plus symbol, click Behaviors Triggered by Events, and then when a key is pressed, do something. Set the key to Escape, and then Action, you want to click the 3 dots, click the plus icon, and then you want to go to Special, and then you want to click Quit Application. And once that's done, it would quit whenever you click you just programmed whenever you click the escape button or the ESC button on your keyboard, it would quit the application that you are inside. Because if you export the game, if I go into File and then Export to a folder, it could get you won't be able to exit the game unless you have clicked the escape button, which is what we just programmed. And if you don't have that, then you would have to restart your whole computer in order to just quit the window. So yeah. Now let's go ahead and test play it by clicking the play button over here. And then you could wait for it to load. When you first start your game for the very first time, it could take a while. And there you go. Here it is. Now, there you go. You could move around with WASD on your keyboard, or the arrow keys on your keyboard if you prefer that. You could also click the space bar to jump, and just run around your scene. Now be careful though, don't fall off the edge, because if you fall off the edge, you'll basically be falling forever, and you would have to restart your game. So now you're like, alright, I like my game as it is now. How do I save it? So all you have to do is go to File, Save, or Control S. So we'll just save it. And then I already have this file created, but you could basically, and this is just the file from another lesson I did. So it's named CopperCube Lesson 1. That's fine. You can name it whatever you want, and then just click Save. There you go. The file has been saved. Let's go ahead and close out CopperCube, and there you go. Just like that, you're done. And that is Lesson 1 of Kids Coding Cube. Thank you everybody for watching. My name is Daniel, and I hope to see you soon in Lesson 2 of Kids Coding Cube. You're watching Kids Coding Live, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.